you know, 400 million across 6 years, including 3 cross-border deals in sectors including technology, food ingredients, agrochemicals, data, data centers, marine logistics, retail, etc. And I have shared all the company details with him, so he sees a lot of different kind of companies in here, 14 companies with different kind of backgrounds. So he's going to take us through what is capital, cap table, what is valuation, how do you dilute your equity for investment into your company, and various things of that sort to make sure that you are well versed with the FDD, LDD, legal due diligence, financial due diligence, and all the three-letter acronyms for you to enjoy during this next hour and a half. Welcome, Nikhil. We really appreciate you taking the time to educate us. Thank you so much. And the whole platform is for you to talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahesh, for that very generous introduction. And thank you to Tai for inviting me to the event. It's a real honor to be interacting with so many creative entrepreneurs. It's heartening to see the ecosystem flourishing so well. Before I start off, if anyone has any specific questions or areas which you want me to cover, I'll be happy to cover that during the session so that it's, as useful as possible for each of you. So I'll pause just for a second to see if you have any queries. Okay, sure. So no issues. We'll cover the basics of valuation, as Dr. Mahesh mentioned, how we do valuations, and probably touch upon why we should do a valuation. How does it impact your shareholding? What is the what are the subsequent steps after you finish this valuation towards a successful deal closure? So thinking about this session, I was trying to find something how to introduce valuation to anyone really, and I came across one quote from probably the best valuation expert of our times, Ashwath Damodaran. He says that valuation is a bridge where narrative meets numbers. So basically, it's a numerical representation of your story. Valuation in itself is just a process. It's just an exercise. But what it really represents is your story, and that's how you should also look at it. A lot of people can help you with the numbers part of the valuation. If you have your revenue, profitability, and working capital and capital expenditure in place, there's nothing stopping anyone from doing a valuation. But the most critical part of it is what is the story that you're presenting, what is your vision for your company, and try to see what you need to get to that stage. So as you know, I presume we're all here looking for sort of an investment that will probably drive your growth. You already have a concept in place. You already probably either invested or sought small investments to come to this stage, and now you're looking to either advance that concept or commercialize that concept, or try to accelerate your growth, and that's where angel investors, VC funds, venture capital funds, and private equity funds can really help you. And this is the order in which you will usually raise funds. initially you will probably raise smaller amounts from angel investors. Then you'll probably seek slightly higher investments from venture capital funds, and then ultimately much larger investments from private equity funds. We at EY deal primarily with private equity funds, given the size of transactions that we do. But yes, of course, we do interact with VC funds as well on a lot of opportunities, especially in the tech space. The concepts remain the same across. So basically, an investor will infuse certain capital into the company and will expect certain number of shares or certain percentage shareholding in return. The primary goal of any investor is to eventually sell that stake to either to a strategic player or another PE fund, or to the company back, or to the founder for a profit. And if they're investing, let's say 100 rupees, they'd want to get a return on that investment. Now, the purpose of valuation is to determine what percentage shareholding should be allocated to the investor for the capital that is putting in. Now, the basic formula is assuming that you have arrived at a valuation. Let's say your company is valued at 100 rupees, then any investor who's putting in 10 rupees will get 10 by 100, 10% equity shares. Now, how do you arrive at that 100 rupees? There are widely accepted methods. I think we'll cover three of them, three of the most widely used methods. One of them is slightly more recent, may not be relevant for the kind of companies we're looking at, but the first two, I'll explore them in a bit of depth. The first method, and supposedly the most technically robust method, is the intrinsic valuation of a company, which depends on, which relies on the cash flows generated by that company, and you discount the cash flows to the present value. Is everyone aware of the concept of discounting, or should I just illustrate it? Anyone can anyone define why what is discounting of cash flows, or what is the present value of money, if you have heard any of those terms?
I think it may be worthwhile to kind of explain today's money to tomorrow's money kind of thing.
Absolutely. I hope you all can see my screen.
Yeah. Yes, Nikhil.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So, sure. So here I have three sets of cash flows, you can call it. All of them across a period of 5 years. All of them total up to 25. It can be rupees, $1 million, whatever. But what you will see is that while cash flow 1 is equally distributed across 3 years, across the 5 years, cash flow 2 is more towards the future, and cash flow 3 is more front-ended. So on a cumulative basis, all three of them are generating that 25 rupees of cash flows at the end of 5 years, but the timing is different. So if we introduce, let's say, the concept of interest, so whenever you whenever you have money, you can always invest it at a certain interest. Either you can call it a bank, or you can call it any other investment. You'll make a certain return out of it. So if we introduce a concept of interest into these cash flows, so I'm taking a 20% return basically, which I can make on the cumulative cash that I have at that point. So at the end of first year, I have 5 rupees at 20% interest. The following year, I'll generate about 1 rupee from these cash flows, from this cumulative cash that I have. And doing the same thing across years, my cumulative cash will increase in this way. So though the cumulative cash flows is 25, if I were to reinvest my cash flows, I would end up at 37 rupees instead of 25 rupees. Now, if we do the same thing for cash flows 2 and 3, you'll see that cash flows 2, where the cash flows are coming more towards the future, you will have a lesser amount of cumulative cash compared to cash flow 1, and a cash flow 3 where you have it's more front-ended. You're getting more cash flow upfront that will be of a higher value at the end of 5 years. So the introduction of making return on your cash flows has the effect of giving importance to the timing of these cash flows. Now, what is discounted cash flow? So discounted cash flow is nothing but what is the value of these cash flows that I'm expecting in the future as of today. So basically what you will observe is if I give 17.9 rupees, if I had 17.9 rupees at this point and I'm making a 20% return on this, I will end up at the exact same cumulative cash as I would have if I was making these 5 rupees across 5 years. So here you will see that this is the discounted cash flow, discounted value or net present value of these cash flows, expected cash flows. Does it make sense to everyone, or if you have any doubts, happy to take it up.
I mean,
I have a question.
Participants, please speak up or please post a question.
Yeah, see, I'm Dr. Somanayappa from Belida Pharma. I have a question here. When you say
You're breaking up quite a bit.
Flows, is it based on some future predictions, or is it based on some actual set as 1 or 2 years, or how's the figure?
So I understand. So discounting is always done on future cash flows. Of course, future cash flows are always expected. So based on your projected cash flows, you arrive at a present discounted cash flow. So from a valuation perspective, purely the numbers which affect this valuation are only the future numbers, but historical figures, of course, will play a role in determining these future values. But mathematically, the discounted cash flow is impacted only by future cash flows.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this is the core concept of an intrinsic valuation or a cash flow based valuation method. So basically, if I have a business which generates 5 rupees across 5 years, then the value of this these cash flows to me, if I'm expecting a 20% return on my investment, is 17.9 rupees. So if I invest 17.9 rupees, I'll make 20% return if the company generates these cash flows. Right. So this is the basic. This is the basis of discounted cash flow. Now, let's look at this. Let's look at the cash flows first. So how would you determine these cash flows? So that is where the narrative part comes in. What do you see the business generating? What is the cash flow that you see the business will generate? So for example, the most basic approach would be you have a certain amount of revenue that you can generate. So let's say first year we're generating 20 rupees, second 30, 40, 50, right? You will obviously have certain expenses. Let's say expenses are 10, 15, 20, and let's say 25. Then you have a profit. or let's just call it profit for ease of understanding. Okay. And to generate these profits and to grow this revenue, maybe you had some sort of capital expenditure. Let's say you have to invest 5 rupees in capital expenditure every year. So this is the net cash. I'm not bringing working capital into this, but broadly to explain, how do you arrive at these cash flows? Okay, so you have your revenue, you have your expenses from which you get your profit, and there will be other incidentals which you need to pay in order to achieve these numbers. So this is the net cash that your business is generating. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So once you have this, this is a very basic representation. Now, what you would want to do, or you'll be also expected to do, is have a backup for this revenue. How are you saying that you will make whatever 20 rupees, 30 rupees, or 20,000, 30,000 rupees over the years? What is driving this growth? So if I take an example of an edtech company, let's say, where you're offering some service or some courses to students. So what your driver for revenue will be number of students, right? Number of students enrolled. The first year you will have 100 students, second year you may have 200, third year 500, fourth year 1000. And what will you charge? What is the revenue? What is the fee per student? Right? So assume that you're offering, you're making about 30 or 30,000. You can take that, and let's say on a ongoing basis, you're offering more and more service or more complicated or more value-added services. So your fee per student is increasing at this rate. So the revenue you will generate in that year is basically this, right? So here what you've done is, instead of just giving a revenue figure, you have looked at your business and seen that you're saying, okay, what is driving my revenue? What are my sources of income? And what is driving this sort of revenue? So if you're an edtech company, you would look at number of students or number of enrollments or number of schools, number of teachers, whatever it is. Now there is always, you can build as strong a backup as you want. So for example, even for this number of students, you can go back to, okay, if I'm contacting, if I have to generate, if I have to enroll 100 students, then I might have to reach out to 200 students, assuming that 50% of the students I connect will enroll with me. So then you will have this, you'll also have a better backup here, saying that, okay, my plan is to reach out to 200 people, and from past experience, what I've understood is 50% of the approaches I make are enrolling onto my platform. So if I approach 200, I'll get 100 students. And then it's the same. I'll charge them this much, and I'll make this much amount of revenue. So what you're doing here is building up your thesis for the growth of your company. So the more robust your thesis, the better comfort any investor would have, in underwriting this projections. So you can go even further. So why are we reaching out to 200 people? Why not 500 people? Or the other question might be, you're saying you're reaching out to 2,000 students, but are there 2,000 students in the whole market? So there you can also bring in concepts of the total addressable market. So for me, the total market is students, let's say in Hyderabad, or students in Telangana, or students in India. If you're a global platform, it will be students across the world. It could be in a certain segment. I'm looking to target all the K-12 students. I'm looking to target engineering students. And then you take a percentage of addressable market that you're going to target. So I'm going to target 1%, 2% of the addressable market, and that's how you arrive at this number. Right. So there's no limit to how much backup you can build. The stronger data that you have, the stronger base that you have, more robust will be your projection, and the comfort from anyone investing into this company will be higher. So is the similar case with expenses as well? You have to chart down what all are your expenses. So for example, if you're taking a net tech company, then I'm presuming your key cost center will be your teachers or coaches, basically. If you're an online platform, you'll have cloud hosting expenses. You'll have significant marketing expenses. We are talking about reaching out to 200 people. So you also need to understand that to reach out to each and every person, there'll be a certain cost. So there'll be marketing expenses, there'll be administrative expenses, and of course, there'll be some R&D expenses, so content development or any of that sort. So you have to drill down. You have to understand your business and split it up into meaningful buckets, basically. So where am I spending my money? And a similar analysis can be done for each of these line items. So for example, if I have to cater to 100 students on my platform, what is the student teacher ratio that I'm looking at? So for example, I want to have one teacher for every 10 students, right? Then I can arrive at the number of teachers that I need. So basically for 100 students, I'll need 10 teachers. And it will go on like this. And you have an idea about what is the salary that you need to pay per teacher, right? What is the growth in those salaries? You can't expect teachers to work for the same wages. So you have to, let's say if you're paying 5, then next year you'll have to increase it, let's say by 15%. Then you have to assume that sort of growth as well, right? And then you can arrive at your expense for teachers. Basically, you have your number of teachers and you have your salary per teacher. Right? Am I making sense? Or you're able to follow it? If you have any doubts, you can always pause and raise those questions.
Yes, sir. It's quite understandable.
Yeah. Okay. So this is how you would go about it. You should look at all your each of your expenses and then try to build as much backup as possible. Try to project them in a meaningful manner. So for example, even for cloud hosting expenses, though you might be incurring let's say 5 rupees initially, if your scale has doubled, so initially your cloud expenses might also double, but later on it's possible that due to the scale at which you're operating, your cloud expenses might not double when you're doubling your scale, basically. So since you're procuring more and more hosting space, the per unit hosting cost, the cloud hosting cost will reduce. So you have to make realistic estimates of what will be each of these expenses at this scale, right? And even if we look at even some basic assumptions like what is your conversion rate, basically. You need to make realistic assumptions there as well, because initially your conversion might be high, but since I mean, when you're continuously tapping your lower and lower probability customers, your probability of conversion might also drop. So again, this is what I mean by your thesis. Basically, what is the view you have of the business and the market that you're operating in? So that should feed into the model, and whatever whatever result that you get, the valuation will be done on that.
Usually, what will be the window period for a valuation as a whole? Will it be for a certain term, or is it for 1 year, 2 year, or 5 years? How is it actually valued
So the
when
most
the
common
investors look at the numbers?
correct. So the most common time period is 5 years. But if you again depends on the company, but the most common period is 5 years. You could extend it by 2 or 3 years depending on what kind of changes are happening in the business.
Okay.
So ideally it's a 5-year period.
Okay.
So I think let's probably continue with this example a bit. I'll just make a few changes. Right. So again, with marketing, it will completely depend on the reach out that you're doing. You might be doing some branding which is required for you to attain that sort of growth. Some SOE investment is also to be done, or probably you're giving some discounts or incentives for the customers to enroll. So all these sort of things will be included in marketing and administrative and R&D expenses. So once you have this, so this is what you have built is basically the income statement of the company, right? What you have built is the income statement of the company till EBITDA level. So we can call it operating profit. And below operating profit, typically for a financial model, you would also have finance costs and depreciation. So these are not directly related to your business, but they are finance is cash flow, is a negative, is a cash outflow basically, which you have to consider, and depreciation is basically the depreciation of your assets. So you will arrive at a profit before tax. And you'll have to pay tax, and then you'll have profit after tax. So this will be your full income statement, basically. So you'll start with revenue, you will have all your expenses, you will have your operating profit, and then you will have your finance costs if you have any loans. You'll have depreciation on your fixed assets. You'll arrive at profit before tax, and you'll end up at profit after tax. Right? That completes your income statement. So apart from this, you will also be required to chart out your balance sheet and your cash flow statement as well. So while the income statement is for a period, basically from for the financial year, starting from let's say 1st March of a year to 30th April. So 1st April to 31st March. Okay, of the next year. So that will be your period for the income statement. Your balance sheet will be as on a certain date. So for example, as of 31st March 2022. Right. Now, what the balance sheet represents is what are the assets and liabilities that your company has. So let's start with the assets. So assets are basically what are, there are two kinds of assets. There is fixed assets, which are your land, building, any equipment that you may have, or even your intellectual property. Right. So let's say you have built a software, or you built a, you have a patented recipe or anything like that. That will be your intellectual property. So these are your fixed assets. So whatever investments that you have made, which have generated an asset. So you bought a land, you spent, let's say 100 rupees to buy a land, then those 100 rupees will be reflected here. Right, so those are your fixed assets. So the other parts, the other kind of assets that you would have is your current assets. Typically, your current assets will include trade receivables. So, for example, for a B2B company, let's say you have sold 100 rupees worth of goods to your, to your customer. He'll pay you back in, let's say 30 days. Then that 100 will come and sit in your trade receivables. And whenever he pays it, you knock it off. Right, and then you will also have your inventory. So you bought certain goods from your suppliers, you're yet to sell them. So you will have that amount of inventory. So these are your assets, which you can monetize. On the liabilities side, you have similarly current liabilities. Right, which typically includes trade payables. So you have bought certain material from your supplier and you are yet to pay him. So that will come and sit in your payable, and whenever you pay it off, this will be knocked off. There will be a few other items. You can look at balance sheets of various companies. There will be a few other items: short-term loans and advances. In liabilities, you have employee provisions, etc. But just trying to keep it at a basic level. These are your main items, and these are the items also which you will need to project. The cash flow statement again is more of a, at least for us, it's more of a bridge between the income statement and the balance sheet. So let's say your PBT is, let's say 50 rupees. Then what are the non-cash expenses or items that are happening here? And what was you arrive at a net change in cash, and you will have opening cash and closing cash. And you will arrive, so if the total cash that you generated in that year was 40 rupees, let's say, and your opening cash was, let's say 10, then your closing cash will be this. So in an ideal scenario, you would have, without any working capital changes or anything like that, whatever profit you would have generated. So for example, this 10 rupees would have come here. But of course, there will be a few changes. So for example, you would have spent 5 rupees in capital expenditure, or though you sold 20 rupees worth of goods, 5 rupees worth of goods, the cash for 5 rupees worth of goods has still not come. So that will also get reduced from this 10. So there will be a few cash adjustments which will happen here, and you will have the cash flow statement. So I think we spoke at length about the income statement. On the balance sheet, the way you would make the projections, I think the fixed assets will be very self-evident. Whatever assets you need to deliver this revenue is what you will include here. right? So if you need to set up an office, set up a manufacturing facility to generate those kind of manufactures that those many goods, then you will have to make those sort of investments. On the trade receivables, so what you need to project is basically what is the credit period my customers are demanding. So let's say I'm giving my customer a 3 months credit period, right? You're allowing the customer to pay for the goods that he has taken after 3 months. So then basically what will happen, so whatever sales that you have done in the last 3 months, so which is basically January, February and March, will be outstanding. So for example, you were selling your sales for the year for 120 rupees. Then your sales in Jan, Feb, March will be this by 12 into 3, right? So 30 rupees worth of sales are outstanding as of March. So your trade receivables as of March would be 30. So the formula is basically the total sales for the year divided by number of months, which is 12, multiplied by number of months of, or you can say by 12 into number of months of credit period. So those many days or those many months worth of sales will be stuck in your trade receivables. For inventory, it's a similar procedure. So for example, if you have to, you're making 10 rupees of sales per month, then let's say you'll have to maintain inventory for that. So basically you are maintaining 3 months of inventory, let's say, so that you don't run out of stock when you're making sales. Then basically it will be the same formula by 12 into 3 months of inventory, or if you're maintaining 2 months of inventory, it will be 2. Right? This will go into your inventory. So as of March, you will have 20 rupees worth of inventory in your books. So this is how you project it. So for this, you'll need an understanding of, okay, how many days of inventory do I need to maintain for my business to run smoothly? A lot of times this is also determined by your historical levels. So for example, if my sales were 100 rupees last year and I maintained 30 rupees inventory, if my sales is increased to 200, most likely I will be required to maintain 60 crores of inventory. So a lot of times the number of months of receivables or number of months of inventory and even payables is determined using the historical period. But if you don't have historical financials, then you should again rely on your day-to-day situation, what you're going through. Trade payables is also a similar case. So for example, I have to buy, my total purchases for the year are 100 rupees, right? Then I have a credit period of 2 months with my supplier. Then basically I don't have to pay for the last 2 months of these purchases. So basically I'll do 100 by 12 into 2. So my trade payables will be 16.7, right? So you'll be expected to do this for the full period. You have to generate the cash flow statement as well. And then you can arrive at the actual cash flow that the company is generating, which you will plug in here. So that is a method for arriving at this cash flow. Any questions?
So Nikhil, this cash flow is necessary for creating that valuation table, right?
Yes.
DCF. Yeah, DCF.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So the cash flow that we use for DCF, if I can just explain that quickly, it will be a little technical, I guess. I won't go into the very, the logic of certain before tax and interest. So a key factor, a key number that you require for DCF is your earnings before tax and interest. So basically what you will do is you will have your profit after tax. Let's say it's 10 rupees. Your tax was, let's say 2. Right. So, okay, so your earnings before tax and interest is, you take your you take your PAT, you add back your tax, and you add back your interest. So this is your earnings before tax and interest, EBIT. And then you will calculate what is the tax liability on this. Let's say the current tax rate is around 25%. Right? And you will add depreciation because it's a non-cash expense. So your depreciation is, let's say 1. So the total is this minus this plus this. So from this you will also deduct the capex that you require each year, right? And then you get the free cash flow. So this is how you arrive at the cash flow for DCF. So broadly what you're doing is you're ignoring the effect of interest and depreciation. You're adding that back in 2 different places. Tax is of course a cash expense, so that has to be considered. But you're removing the effect of a non-cash expense like depreciation, and you're removing the effect of interest because you're removing the effect of capital structure. So for example, if you need 100 rupees, you can either have equity of 100 rupees and a debt of 0, or you can raise, you can get 20 rupees debt and raise 80 in the form of equity. So in order to remove these effects, to make a capital structure neutral valuation, we tend to ignore the interest as well. So broadly what you have done is you have taken your profit after tax, you have added back the tax and interest, recalculated the tax on that higher number, because since you're considering that you don't have any debt, you're adding back the interest, and then you will have to pay a higher tax, of course. That's why you're paying tax on this higher number. And you're also adding back depreciation because depreciation is a non-cash expense. But consequently, you are also conversely you're also reducing the capex, because that is the expenditure that you need to make to keep the company functioning. So ideally, for the in this you will also have working capital change. So as you grow the company, more of your money will get stuck in working capital. So you should account for that as well. So for example, if you had 30 rupees receivables at 100 crore sales, but now you're at 200 crores, you will have 60 crores of receivables. So more of your cash is stuck in the business. So basically 30 crores of cash is stuck in your business, right? So you have to factor for that as well. And that is how you arrive at the free cash flow. And this cash flow is what goes into the DCF. So this cash is available for distribution to the stakeholders of the company. So assuming there is no debt, so this 3 rupees can be divided among all equity shareholders for them to realize that value. So this free cash flow over the years. So first year you will have 3, maybe second year you might have 6, 12, or 15. So all these numbers, all these values are distributable to the equity holders, and that's the reason you use this in the valuation. What is the value to the equity holder? The value to the equity holder finally is what is the cash flow generated from this business, and this is the free cash that is available with the company that can be distributed to equity shareholders.
Any questions from the audience? Nikhil, I have one question. What happens if this free cash flow is negative in the first year, for example?
Correct. So yes, of course, for a startup, it's more than likely that your free cash flow at the beginning is negative. That is usually the case. That only shows. So, for example, you'll also have a corresponding negative balance in your cash, which you have to fund using equity. That will be actually one of the main reasons why you will raise funds. Basically, for example, in this example, if we talk about reaching out to 400 students. So you'll have to reach out to these 400 students in year 1 in order to get these 200 students in year 2. So you'll need this upfront investment. So your marketing expense might actually be a lot higher than what your current business is generating. So then, of course, you will end up with a negative cash flow. That is not a problem. Once you fund that negative cash flow with equity, you'll have to fund those negative cash flow with equity, but this negative number will remain here. The idea is to make it positive over the years. So, for example, in this example, let's say your initial cash flow was -10. Then you'll have to compensate that by generating positive cash flows in later years. So it's not a problem if initially you have a negative cash flow, as long as you are on a path to a positive free cash flow. And that should be the goal of the business. And that negative cash flow will also be considered into the valuation. Does that clarify the question?
Any other questions from anybody else? Yes, I mean, I was asking just to make sure that people understand negative at the beginning is not a big thing to manage, because there are startups. Yeah, there are startups in the first year, second year. So
in fact, I would urge you to do a very basic sort of this P&L, at least for you to understand that yes, if I have to grow at a certain rate, what is the money I need? And at the core, that is what drives that investment. Basically, that's the reason that you're raising funds, is basically to accelerate your growth. So a stable company which is generating small cash flows can continue to grow. So for example, if you made 50 rupees this year, you reinvest that into the company, you buy some more equipment or you do some more marketing, then you can grow by, let's say, 5%. What investors, external investors give you is basically, if the product is viable and your promoter group and the investor believes that yes, with the right investment, we can grow it from 5 crores to 100 crores in in 5 years instead of 10 years. That is what will spur the investment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I have
any other
another
questions? Yeah, please,
Yes.
Radha.
So there is a one thing which I heard from people regarding this valuation and cash flow. See, like for next 5 years, like showing the earnings per share or the cash flow in negative, and putting all the investment into the branding, marketing, and increase the value of the brand. Is that the good, or like showing the profit side is the good? Like how to convince
Yes.
them?
So this ties back to the initial question about the period for the valuation, right? See, the intrinsic value method that we're doing now is heavily dependent on the cash flows. If during the valuation period you're only generating negative cash flows, then the value there is no value to the company, right? So if really that is the business scenario where you need to invest for, let's say, 3-4 years even to reach a certain scale, then you'll have to definitely extend the projection period, because the path to profitability should definitely be visible. We can't assume that okay, we've invested for 5 years and then just assume that okay, we'll have a certain value at the end of that period. So especially for when you're using intrinsic valuation, which technically is the most robust valuation there is, you'll have to show a path to positive cash flow.
Alright, so like one more doubt which I have is like where to show this CAGR growth, and if that is how much percentage should it increase every time?
Okay, so see, this free cash flow is a completely derived number. What you should be focusing on is the projecting your revenue and expenses. So I believe what you're asking is how to project these revenues, right? What kind of growth that needs to come in? Is that the question? Am I getting it right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, so that again ties back to this sort of sort of a back work, a backup, right? So you will really need to understand what am I going to do this year. So for example, let's say you're an agri tech company, you're connecting farmers to you're procuring from farmers, you're connecting them to customers. That's your business model. Then what you need to think about is, okay, this year I'm going to reach out to 500 farmers. That means every month I need to reach out to these many number of farmers. You need to evaluate, do I have 500 farmers that I can reach out to in my network? How many people do I need to do I have enough manpower to reach out to these 500 farmers? So that is the sort of ground up analysis that you need to do with your existing resources, or assuming that okay, I'll get let's say 25 lakhs from an investor, then I can hire, let's say, 3 people additionally, and that will give me the ability to reach out to 50 more farmers, and what is the value that's going to bring in. So that's sort of a ground up analysis is what you need to do, and that will give you the growth numbers. There's no point in really assuming just a percentage growth rate. So it's always easy to enter a number, right? So I'm going to grow by 100% this year, I'm going to grow by 80% the next year. It's very easy to put in the numbers, but what you need to demonstrate and what you need to work on is the feasibility, and what is the rate of growth that you can sustain, and you need to also justify the availability of the targetable market as well, and your access to it. So this percentage should really be a derived number. You should focus more on the operating metrics of your business. How much can you do this year? And how will that feed into the next year?
But one more question which I have is like, is that depends upon the investment, how much I raise, or should I have to fix the investment and do this analysis?
See, ideally, the investment that you require should be, a derived. It should be a derived value, but in a practical sense, you will have you'll have certain constraint on the amount of funds you can raise. See, any business theoretically can take any amount of investment. So you can always say that, okay, if I have 100 crores, I can do this. But what is the feasibility? So, what also comes in at that point is, what is your management bandwidth? So, for example, if you are a consumer brand, let's say, theoretically you can say that, okay, if I have 100 crores, I can launch 50 different SKUs, and I can manufacture all of them if I have 100 crores. But what is really your management bandwidth? And do you have 50 products in the pipeline? Do you have customers for those 50 products? Do you have distribution networks in place to move the quantity of goods that you'll produce with 100 crores? So I think a lot of founders fall into this sort of false sense that, okay, if you have the money, you can do so much. But ideally, it should be a derived value. So I want to do this. I have this opportunity which I can explore, but I need, let's say 20 lakhs, 50 lakhs to sustain till that point. So for example, if you have a product in development, you have a team of 5 people working on this product, and you think that, okay, within 1 year, I'm going to commercialize this. Then what you should be seeking is, okay, for that 1 year, I need to pay each of my employees this much, and that's why this is the amount of funds that I need. Or for example, if I have 7 people, I can do it. I can finish this project more quickly. So if I raise, let's say 30 lakhs, then I can pay these people and get to the product. So ideally, it should be a derived value. What is the growth that you can realistically manage, and what is the investment required for that growth, rather than trying to see, okay, I have 50 crores available from someone. How do I spend it?
Right, sir. Thank you. That's it.
Any other questions?
So as an extension of what Radha was asking right now, so how should we equate this investment requirement to equity?
So what I assume, so there are two kinds of business, right? So if you're, especially if you're sort of a tech company without much of a fixed asset, you haven't raised much scale, it might be a little difficult for you to raise funds in debt. But broadly speaking, there are two forms of infusion which a company can take: equity and debt. Debt can be from various sources, banks, NBFCs, or anything else. Equity is from investors. So whatever investment requirement that you have, if you can raise debt, that's well and good. Or your whole requirement will be met in the form of equity. There'll be some cash. Usually for a stable company, you'll also have some cash generated from the business. But of course, net of that, if you still have a requirement, that has to be met either through debt or equity. And usually for startups, debt is slightly difficult depending on the kind of business model that you have. If you have fixed assets to give a security of you, if you have a decent, scale so that you can get a working capital loan, you have orders which you can show to get a working capital loan, that's well and good. But otherwise, the investment requirement has to be met through equity.
Yeah, thank you. So how do I equate that to the equity percentage? Like for some investment amount, how do I equate that to equity?
So that is what you're talking about, right? So you have, let's say these are the cash flows that you arrived at. And we'll talk about the discount rate a bit later. So when you apply a discount rate, you get a certain valuation. So 40, let's say 45 crores is your valuation. Then if an investor is willing to invest 5 crores, then the stake that is given to the investor is 11%.
Okay.
So there's 11% dilution in your stake. So currently, if you're owning 100% of the company, you will divest about 11%.
Thank you.
Nikhil, one other question, most probably it may be worth asking, is that you indicated based on just only the financials. What about the goodwill? What about the other parts of it, where there is a value into the company in terms of the experience of the the startup founders and various other aspects? Do you want to cover it in a couple of sentences or a little bit?
Sure. So yes, of course, there is always a sense of investors a lot of times invest in the promoter rather than the company from a mindset perspective, basically. But strictly from a valuation perspective, where that should reflect is the ability of the promoter should reflect in some tangible format. Again, it can reflect in two ways. One is how much growth can the investor underwrite. So, for example, depending on the confidence in the promoter and the background of the promoter and the experience of the promoter, it might be a certain investor might back someone saying that, okay, when you're saying I can make this 5 crore company into a 30 crore company, I believe you because of your background. I think the stronger you are, the stronger you are in your industry, the more expertise that you have, the investor has more confidence in underwriting these sort of projections. See, because at the end of the day, these are all projections. You're saying that, okay, I'll achieve this much amount of revenue, but how will the investor, how will he underwrite it? How will he believe that? So that's where all these softer aspects do come in. About the background of the promoters and the expertise that they have and the market knowledge that they have.
Thanks, Nikhil. Also, can you cover a little bit about the brand building and the value which it brings to the company?
Sure. So moving on to the next part, basically, why do you need an investment? I think we covered it in brief. They're saying that the investment will really help you accelerate your growth. So, for example, if you're able to generate even small amount of cash flows, you'll be able to survive. But to really accelerate growth and capture that market quickly, that's where an investor can really help. So there are two things that that investor can bring in really. One is, of course, the financial aspect. That is definitely there, but the other softer aspect is a lot of times you'll need, especially in the both in the B2B and B2C space. In fact, you'll need a lot of visibility and further investments. As you grow larger and larger. So that's where the investors can really help by connecting you to the right industry leaders and give your company more visibility. And of course, when it comes to the next funding round, let's say a VC fund will be much more likely to invest in you if you have a sort of a professional investor on your board, because he can have that confidence that yes, this company is being run properly. This an eminent person is on this board, and he can ensure. I mean, they believe that he's been ensuring that things are run in the right way in the company. So it's not just about the financial aspect, but there are a lot of softer aspects to an investment.
Thank you. I mean, one of the other case may be like CRED.
Yes. So again, I can understand the current scenario in the market is it's unique. I would say it's good in certain ways. It's bad in certain ways. There is a lot of confidence in the Indian economy. That's a very good part. But in a lot of cases, it's giving a lot of people a false sense of this thing that okay, everybody is getting funded very easily. But again, any investment has to be made with a robust underlying thesis, and any investor is or the objective of any business, or at least for an investor, what he's expecting from the business is a return. And I would always recommend look at cash flow before anything else. You have to show that path to profitability. There might be cases like CRED who are running huge losses, but yes, of course, the innate potential is what the certain investors value. So yes, there are always cases in where a negative cash flow company is also funded, but you have to be able to represent that potential. So if we take the example of CRED, even the kind of income streams that CRED can have once it reaches that critical mass is immense, and that's the reason why the investments continue to happen. The nature of information that CRED collects, and the nature of and by the positioning of that product itself, the way the kind of customers that they will have, that is what is the asset of that company. CRED is not about not about a small app or anything. It's about the kind of customers that they are enrolling with high credit scores and what can be done with those customers. So an investment will also be made based on the potential of the business, and that ties into the question that we had earlier. What happens if you have negative cash flows in the beginning? That's not a problem. It's just that you need to still have that potential to make large profits in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, I have one question. Let's say we have two different kind of product lines, and is it good to ask the investment on the whole for the company, or is it good to focus only on one product?
See, these kind of things always differ on a case-to-case basis. See, I would always say what is limiting at this stage is your management bandwidth. So your bandwidth, the promoter's bandwidth is what is the constraint. If you really think you can manage two product portfolios, nothing like it, of course, but you have to be able to substantiate that.
Thank you.
And added to that, the growth can be shown by multiple product lines also.
Yes. No, absolutely. So again, if you are planning, so for example, if you're already in a certain product and there is an opportunity for diversification or opportunity for an adjacent, getting into an adjacent market, then absolutely yes, that can always be factored in.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
Do you want me to touch upon the transaction process once as well?
Yeah, please. Maybe for about 5 minutes. I think We are
Sure.
doing pretty well on time, so maybe another 5 minutes and then we can start closing it up.
Sure. So usually the way these transactions pan out is once you have a basic contact with an investor, you would start working on let's say one presentation which talks about your business, what are your strengths, weaknesses, what is the market opportunity that you're chasing, and what is your essentially a USP, why you will be able to capture the market before anyone else. So one sort of pitch presentation has to be made. In parallel, you will also have to prepare the kind of financial model that I talked about with revenue projections, expense projections, your balance sheet. Though that also has to be made with the relevant backups that we talked about. Once that is in place, at least in larger transactions, we do have some sort of a non-binding offer where the investor gives you sort of an indication that yes, from the basic information that I've received now, I think your company's valuation is this much, and I'm willing to invest this much amount. So that will be sort of like an indicative valuation and an indicative investment. Once the the shareholders and the investor are in broad alignment that yes, okay, this valuation is fine, this investment is fine, we can work with that, then the due diligence process will start. Usually there is a financial due diligence is basically checking whatever representations that you have made about your business. For example, you have said that okay, during the last financial year, I did this much amount of sales, I had this much amount of expenses, this was my profit, this is the capex that I made. I could collect all my dues within this period. So whatever claims that you make, the investor will have to verify that. So that is the due diligence process essentially. To check that whatever representations that you have made, is that true? And or are all the financials in all the filings in place? So for example, if you say that okay, are all your ROC filings done? Do you have your board mates in place? Or do you have all your licenses for your manufacturing facilities? Or if you need PCB approval for something, do you have that? So that all will be covered as part of a legal due diligence, which is more about your filings and licenses. And financial due diligence will be done covering your financials. Have you recognized all your expenses properly? The whatever revenue that you're representing, do you have all the invoices for that? Has all that revenue converted into cash at some point? Are you collecting dues from your from your customers in the right time? Are you paying your suppliers within time? Do you have any defaults on your loans? If you have any, all these sort of things will be checked during the financial due diligence. And once the due diligence is complete, there might be a few adjustments here and there, possibly. And then you will have to execute a shareholders agreement, basically, which documents the fact that, okay, this investor is investing this much amount of money and is being allotted this many amount of shares. Once that is signed, then you will make the required filings for the issuance of the shares. That is the broad process. From a diligence perspective, in larger deals, there are of course a lot of different diligences that are done. There are technical diligences that are done. There are commercial diligences that are done, which ascertain the either the technical expertise of the company or the from a commercial diligence perspective, it will be okay, is it a lucrative market for us to get in? What is the size of this market? Various due diligences can be done, but the basic ones will always be FTD and financial due diligence and legal due diligence. There's also, as part of financial due diligence, they'll also look at all your tax filings, which is sometimes called a tax due diligence as well, or your income tax returns in place. Are you making your GST filings in time? Have you paid all your tax dues? All that sort of matters.
Thanks. There is a question, Nikhil. Is there any defined ratio of returns to provide to investors?
So a return, a lot of times we look at a percentage return that an investor wants to make. This varies highly. So I think initially we talked about this, right? The angel investors, the VC funds and the PE funds. the return expectation is in the inverse order basically. So angel investors will have a very high return expectation, VC will be little lower, PA will be little lower than that. The return expectation of an investor is a reflection of the riskiness. So you can maybe think of it this way. There is a very high probability of let's say a 50 lakh company failing or going bankrupt or not being able to grow to a scale than let's say a 5 crore company, because there is more market acceptance, the product is proven, the technology is proven, the company has shown that there is a market for this and they have been able to capture some of that market, so there is more certainty. So as you grow, the certainty of your future growth or the security of your cash flows will increase. So an angel investor who is investing at a very, very early stage is taking on a lot of risk. For that reason, let's say if an angel investor is making 10 investments, there is a high likelihood that 8 of their investments will not really pan out. So he whatever return expectation is that whatever returns that he makes, he has to make in those 1 or 2 investments basically. So that's the reason usually angel investors will have a high required rate of return, which is a reflection of the high risk of the company. But as you move on to the VC stage and the PE stage, the return expectations will also be lower. For example, PE funds will have a return expectation of about, let's say in India at least, they'll have around 18%, 15 to 18% on their equity. But as you move towards the angel investor side, the return expectations will be much higher. So as you move forward, you can expect, if you've diluted, let's say 10%, for a 50 lakh investment now, doesn't mean that you'll have to dilute that much, to raise 50 lakhs 1 year down the line. Because first of all, your valuation would have increased by that point. So, let's say if you have grown to a certain scale, you can go to a VC fund who will have slightly lower return expectations. So your dilution will be much lower at that point.
That answers the question. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. If there aren't any more questions, I think we spent about an hour and a half, close to.
So there is one question in the chat asking.
Please.
I will read it out. So is there any particular reason for choosing DCF method of valuation?
So yes, we talked mostly about DCF. The other method of valuation I would say is relative valuation, where you find a comparable company to your company and see what that is valued at. And you try to say that, okay, since a company in my same field is being valued at a certain, they are a 100 crore company, they are being valued at 50 crore, let's say 200 crores. So I'm a 50 crore company, I should be valued at 100 crores. This is little difficult in most scenarios, especially when you are operating in a very niche segment where you may not have a lot of comparables. So that's the reason relative valuation much more useful at a slightly, I would say, larger scale, or where you have easily comparable peers. That's where it will be more helpful. The DCF is a more robust method because it depends only on the company and the investor. The company will give what are the expected cash flows. The investor will have a certain return expectation. So between these two parties, the valuation is decided. That's why it's more of a robust model. It's specifically designed for your company, for your strengths, for your weaknesses, rather than on a very general, a comparable sort of a company.
Does that answer the question? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Then I think we are coming to the end. I see Dr. Paul Lopez from Taiyu Global being here. Dr. Paul Lopez, thank you for taking the time to come in here and it's our pleasure to have you here.
So I'll have a question for Nikhil. Who decides on the valuation and how much negotiations happen in India? I'm a VC. We've only invested in 51 companies in my fund and another 27 companies through Thailand Angels. So I find there's no one answer. I appreciate you covering the waterfront, but I'm going to ask on behalf of the students, should they have a valuation in mind? Should they wait on the investor to give them one if it's their first investor, or how do you get to the right answer in between the two parties?
For a first-time entrepreneur, yeah, at least my usual sense is that it's don't get bogged down by the details of the valuation. Focus on the the vision that you have for your company. And just ensure that just arrive at whatever funds that you need, and then worry about the valuation.
I think you said it well. I tell everybody I want to bet on the business and I want to bet on the people who run the business. The valuation, when all is said and done, is sort of like the last item versus the initial item. I mean, it needs to be reasonable, and there are valuation experts who can help. And these folks will get some help when they connect with their champions and mentors as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Any other questions? Any other things?
Yes, I have a last question. Where do we have to include this? There is two types. Like in this, you have mentioned a discounted cash flow based on the cash flows or assumption. There is also a market growth or market share. Like, how should we have to use this in this method?
If you're talking about market share in the sense of let's say EdTech is a 500 crore market, and how much market share that you have, that is reflected in your revenue. Is that what you're asking, or is it something else?
Yeah, is that related to that?
Okay, then it should factor into your it should factor into your revenue. So the way you arrive at your revenue should take care of the market share. So if you say that, okay, my total addressable market is 10,000 crores, and I'm going to target a specific a specific region or a specific segment of that, that will give you the eventual market share. So I want to capture, let's say, 2% of this market over the period of, let's say, 3 years. That will sort of give you the basis for your revenue projections. And after that, you drill down to the cash flows.
That's it. Thank you.
So for everyone, on behalf of Thai India, Thai Global, Thai U, we would like to thank Nikhil for taking the time, taking all of you through step-by-step process of how to start your spreadsheet, and take you through every step of it, explaining to you what this discounted cash flow is, how do you create such a spreadsheet, how do you go onto your projections, how do you use your present data and the previous year, present year, and the next 4 years or 5 years, and then how do you project it. All of that he has taken you all through in a very systematic and a step-by-step fashion. We all thank you very much for taking the time and energizing this crowd to understand how to do that evaluation for the companies. And as Dr. Paul also mentioned, I think at the end, you need to be focused more on what you need. And that need, how does that translate, and how do you want to grow? And eventually, as Nikhil also indicated, it is in some kind of a negotiation which happens between you and the investor. Of course, you need to have some basic numbers. You need to make sure that your due diligence and financial due diligence, legal due diligence, all of them are clean. And I think he has covered it very well. Thank you so much. And Paul, if you want to say a few words, please feel free.
I'm good. I just am appreciative of the time Nikhil has taken and I think there's one more workshop you're going to do next Friday, right?
Correct.
Awesome.
So,
I think,
yeah.
in fact, maybe we can ask if there are questions not related to this topic, but about the program. We can ask people to put in chat. We can always stay a minute or two longer, but this is the
Definitely.
official end of this particular workshop, right? So
Yes.
we're looking
Yes.
forward to uplifting all of you and your companies.
Correct. And we want all of you to be on time. And the next workshop is a pitch deck mock, where you get to present what your pitch deck is as at present. And we will be understanding, and making sure that, yes, your pitch deck, what exactly happens with it. We'll be evaluating, we'll be looking at it and trying to see that. And Paul, we are looking for some jurors for that. So we will do that along with each other evaluating, and then we will some jurors. So the details of it, how we are going to do that, will be sent out to you very shortly, maybe within the next 2-3 days. So Pradeep will be there sending out emails to you from Taigu. So please watch out for that. And again, Nikhil, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time, appreciate your energy. And I don't want to put a camera because I'm in a place where I'm afraid that I may lose the connectivity. So thank you so much.